Block 1, Hook and Setting. The crying started somewhere over the Atlantic, a piercing wail that cut through the hushed murmur of first class like a knife through silk. Caroline Mitchell pressed her forehead against the cool window of seat 32B, watching clouds drift past 30,000 feet below. She'd been awake for nearly 20 hours straight, her body still operating on the time zone she'd left behind in volunteer work at a rural clinic outside Nairobi. The last 6 months had drained her savings, tested her resolve, and ultimately convinced her that returning home to Boston was the right choice, even if home meant moving back into her childhood bedroom at 27 and starting over completely. The baby's cries grew louder, more desperate. Caroline's eyes drifted closed, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. She'd spent her last dollars on this economy ticket, splurging on the exit row for the extra legroom her 5'9" frame desperately needed. Her nursing certification sat in her carry-on, along with her entire life condensed into 2 bags. She'd left Kenya with nothing but memories of the children she'd helped, the mothers she'd taught, and a broken engagement to a man who'd decided humanitarian work wasn't the life he'd signed up for. "Please, sweetheart, please!" A male voice filtered through the cabin, strained and cracking with desperation. "What do you need? What's wrong?" Caroline opened her eyes. 3 rows ahead, a man stood in the aisle of first class, visible through the gap in the curtain that separated the classes. He held an infant against his shoulder, bouncing rhythmically while passengers around him shifted uncomfortably. The baby couldn't have been more than 3 months old, its tiny face scrunched and red, fists flailing. A flight attendant approached with a bottle, her professional smile tight. "Sir, maybe if you try—" "She won't take it," the man interrupted, his voice thick with exhaustion that Caroline recognized all too well. "She hasn't eaten in 8 hours. I've tried everything." The attendant's smile faltered. "Perhaps the formula isn't warm enough? I can heat it again." "It's not the temperature." The man's shoulders sagged. He looked young, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair disheveled from hours of stress. His shirt, expensive, Caroline noted, probably cost more than her rent, was wrinkled and stained. "She's only ever been breastfed. Her mother died 3 weeks ago. And she won't accept anything else. The pediatrician said it would take time, but—" His voice broke. "I don't know what to do." The cabin fell silent except for the baby's increasingly frantic screams. Caroline felt her heart constrict. She'd seen this before in Kenya, infants refusing bottles after losing their mothers, their tiny bodies rejecting substitutes for the one thing that meant safety and love. She shouldn't get involved. She had no job, no prospects, and barely enough money to survive the next month, while she searched for nursing positions in a market that wanted experience she didn't quite have in the ways they needed. The last thing she needed was to draw attention to herself in first class, where she clearly didn't belong, but the baby's cries triggered something deep in her training, in the part of her that had chosen nursing because she couldn't stand by when someone suffered. Caroline unbuckled her seatbelt. "Miss, please remain seated," a flight attendant said as Caroline approached the first-class curtain. "I'm a nurse," Caroline said quietly. "I might be able to help." The attendant hesitated, glancing at the man with the baby, then back at Caroline's rumpled clothes and worn sneakers. Caroline knew what she saw, a tired economy passenger who looked like she'd been traveling for days, which she had. "I spent the last 6 months in East Africa working with new mothers and infants," Caroline continued, keeping her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "Please, let me try." The man turned, and Caroline's breath caught. Up close, she could see the hollows under his eyes, the grief etched into the lines around his mouth. But more than that, she saw desperation, the kind that came from watching someone you love suffer and being powerless to stop it. "You're a nurse?" he asked, hope flickering across his exhausted features. "Pediatric specialty," Caroline confirmed. "May I?" He didn't hesitate, stepping aside to let her into the first-class cabin. Several passengers watched with poorly concealed curiosity, but Caroline focused only on the baby. She was beautiful despite her distress, with wispy dark hair and her father's strong features, her tiny body trembling with the force of her cries. "What's her name?" Caroline asked softly, reaching out slowly. "Nora." The man's voice cracked on the name. "Nora Catherine Westbrook. She's 12 weeks old. Hello, Nora." Caroline murmured, gently touching the baby's cheek. Nora's skin was hot, flushed from crying, but not feverish. "You're having a very hard day, aren't you?" The baby's cries hitched, her unfocused eyes turning toward Caroline's voice. "Mr. Westbrook," Caroline began. "Harrison," he interrupted. "Just Harrison, please." Caroline met his eyes, seeing past the expensive clothes and first-class seat to the terrified father beneath. "Harrison, when did she last eat? Anything at all?" "She took maybe an ounce this morning before we left London." "Nothing since." He ran a hand through his hair, making it stand up in different directions. "The doctor said she needed to adapt to formula, that she'd eventually get hungry enough, but I can't watch her starve herself." Caroline's mind raced through options, each one discarded as quickly as it formed. She could try different holding positions, different bottle nipples, different formulas. But if Nora had been refusing for 8 hours, those weren't the answers. "I know this is going to sound strange," Caroline said slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "But I might have a solution. It's unconventional, and you'd have every right to say no." Harrison shifted Nora to his other shoulder, patting her back desperately as her cries intensified. "What is it?" Caroline took a breath, knowing that what she was about to suggest could be misunderstood, could be rejected, could change everything about the next few hours of her life. But as she looked at Nora's tiny, anguished face, she knew she had to offer. "I gave birth 7 months ago," she said quietly, the words still painful even now. "My daughter lived for 3 days. I've been suppressing lactation, but I still have milk. If you're comfortable with it, I could nurse Nora, just enough to calm her down and get something in her stomach." The silence that followed felt infinite. Harrison stared at her, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and something that might have been hope. "You would do that?" he whispered. "For a stranger?" Caroline thought of her daughter, of those 3 perfect, terrible days, of the milk her body had produced for a baby who would never need it. She thought of every mother she'd helped in Kenya, every child she'd tried to save. "No mother should have to watch their child suffer," she said softly. "And no child should go hungry when there's help available. But Harrison, this is your decision. I need you to be completely certain you're comfortable with this." Harrison looked down at Nora, whose cries had weakened to exhausted whimpers. Caroline could see the calculation behind his eyes, the weighing of options, the desperate need for his daughter to be okay. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, please. If you're willing, I'd be grateful beyond words." The flight attendant who'd been hovering stepped forward. "I'll need to see some identification and your nursing credentials." Caroline pulled out her license, hands shaking slightly as the reality of what she'd offered settled over her. The attendant examined everything carefully before nodding. "We have a private area in the rear galley," she said. "I'll make sure you have privacy." As Caroline followed Harrison and Nora toward the back of the plane, she felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her back. Whispers started immediately, speculation rippling through the cabin. But none of that mattered, as much as the tiny girl in Harrison's arms, finally quiet in anticipation, as if she somehow knew relief was coming. In the small galley area, hidden behind drawn curtains, Caroline settled into the jump seat. Harrison handed Nora over carefully, his hands lingering as if reluctant to let go. The moment Nora latched on, the change was instantaneous. Her body relaxed, tiny hands coming up to rest against Caroline's chest as she nursed hungrily. Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. Tears for the daughter who should have been in her arms. Tears for this baby who'd lost her mother. Tears for the strange twist of fate that had brought them together at exactly this moment. "Thank you," Harrison breathed, sinking down to crouch beside them. "I don't know how to thank you enough," but as Caroline looked down at Nora's peaceful face, something shifted inside her chest. This wasn't just about feeding a hungry baby. This was about 3 lives intersecting at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way. She just didn't know yet how much this single act of compassion would change everything. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the small galley was Nora's contented nursing and the distant hum of the aircraft engines. Caroline kept her eyes fixed on the baby, avoiding Harrison's gaze as he sat on the floor beside the jump seat, his expensive suit jacket abandoned somewhere in first class. When Nora finally pulled away, milk-drunk and drowsy, Harrison reached for her with practiced hands, settling her against his shoulder for burping. The tenderness in his movements surprised Caroline. This wasn't a man who'd hired others to care for his child. This was a father who'd learned every detail of infant care through necessity and love. "She's beautiful," Caroline said softly, breaking the silence. "She looks exactly like her mother." Harrison's voice was rough with emotion. Victoria would have known what to do. She always knew. Caroline wanted to ask what had happened, but the raw grief in his voice stopped her. Instead, she adjusted her clothing and stood, her legs stiff from the awkward position. "I should get back to my seat," she said. "Wait." Harrison stood as well, Nora dozing peacefully in his arms. A stark contrast to the screaming infant from an hour ago. "I don't even know your name. Caroline. Caroline Mitchell. Caroline." He said her name like he was memorizing it. "What you did, what you're doing, most people wouldn't have even considered it. Most people haven't lived through what I have." The words came out before Caroline could stop them. She immediately regretted the opening, the vulnerability. But Harrison's eyes softened with understanding. "The baby you mentioned. I'm sorry." Caroline nodded, not trusting her voice. 3 days. That's all she'd had with Amelia. 3 perfect days before the congenital heart defect the doctors had missed took her daughter away. Marcus had left 2 months later, unable to handle the grief, unable to look at Caroline without seeing everything they'd lost. "How long is the flight?" Harrison asked, pulling her back to the present. "About 2 more hours to Boston." "She'll be hungry again before we land." He said it carefully, watching her face. "I don't want to presume, but I'll help," Caroline interrupted. "Of course I will. I'm not going to let her go hungry when I can do something about it." Relief flooded Harrison's features. "Thank you. And please let me compensate you for—" "No," Caroline's voice was firm. "You don't pay someone for this. That's not what this is. Then at least let me upgrade your seat to first class for the rest of the flight. You shouldn't have to keep walking back and forth, and honestly," he paused, a small smile tugging at his exhausted features, "I could use someone who actually knows what they're doing. I've only been a single father for 3 weeks, and I'm clearly terrible at it." "You're not terrible," Caroline said automatically. "You're grieving and exhausted and trying to care for an infant on your own. That's not the same thing as being terrible." The flight attendant pulled back the curtain slightly. "Is everything all right?" "Perfect," Harrison said. "Could you help move Ms. Mitchell's belongings to the empty seat next to mine? She'll be staying in first class for the remainder of the flight." The attendant's eyebrows rose, but she nodded professionally. "Of course, Mr. Westbrook." 20 minutes later, Caroline found herself in seat 3B, her worn carry-on looking distinctly out of place among the leather and luxury of first class. Harrison sat beside her in 3A, Nora sleeping in a bassinet attached to the bulkhead in front of them. The other first-class passengers had stopped staring, though Caroline caught a few lingering glances. "Tell me about Kenya," Harrison said quietly, his eyes on his sleeping daughter. "What were you doing there?" Caroline hesitated. She'd spent 6 months pouring everything she had into that clinic, into those mothers and babies, trying to outrun her grief by saving others. "I worked at a rural maternal health clinic, teaching new mothers, helping with deliveries, managing infant nutrition programs. That's incredible work." It was necessary work. Caroline watched Nora sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling. "After Amelia died, I couldn't stay in Boston. Everywhere I looked, I saw the nursery we'd prepared, the life we'd planned. My ex-fiancé couldn't understand why I needed to leave, but I couldn't breathe there anymore. And now you're coming back. Money ran out. Visa expired. Reality called." She tried to keep her voice light, but the anxiety about her uncertain future crept in anyway. "I have maybe enough savings for 2 months of rent while I look for nursing positions. Most hospitals want more recent domestic experience than I have." Harrison was quiet for a moment. "What if I told you I needed a nurse?" Caroline turned to look at him fully for the first time since sitting down. In the better light of first class, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe 35 at most. His features were sharp, refined by good genetics and probably better living, but exhaustion had carved temporary lines around his eyes and mouth. "I'm serious," he continued when she didn't respond. "I've been through 4 nannies in 3 weeks. None of them understood why Nora wouldn't eat, why she cried constantly. They kept suggesting I hire someone else, as if my daughter was the problem." His voice hardened with old anger. "You helped her in minutes. You understood what she needed. Harrison, I'm not a nanny. I'm a pediatric nurse." "Even better." He shifted to face her, careful not to disturb the bassinet. "Look, I know this is sudden. I know we just met. But I'm desperate, Caroline. I run a commercial real estate development company, Westbrook Properties. Before Victoria died, I was in the office 60 hours a week, traveling constantly. I've been trying to do it all from home for 3 weeks, and I'm failing. Nora needs someone who understands her needs, someone with actual medical training. You need a job. This could work." Caroline's mind raced. Live-in nurse for a billionaire's baby? It sounded like something from a movie, not real life. "You don't know anything about me beyond what happened today. I know you spent 6 months doing volunteer work in Africa. I know you offered to help a stranger's baby without hesitation. I know you understand grief and loss, and you're not afraid of it." Harrison's dark eyes were intense, focused. "I know Nora stopped crying the moment you held her, and she's sleeping peacefully for the first time in 8 hours. That's enough for me." "I'd need to think about it," Caroline said slowly. "This is a big decision." "Of course. I'll give you my contact information. Take a few days, check my references. I'll provide whatever you need." He pulled out his phone, then paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why did you help? Really? You said you'd been suppressing lactation. That must have been part of moving forward for you. This could set you back." Caroline looked down at her hands, thinking about the lactation suppression medication she'd stopped taking 2 days ago in Kenya, unable to afford the prescription refill. She'd been planning to see a doctor in Boston, to finish the process properly, but then Nora had been crying, and instinct had overridden everything else. "Because I couldn't save my own daughter," she said quietly. "But maybe I could help save someone else's." The honesty hung between them, raw and real. Harrison reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry for your loss, truly. I'm sorry for yours too." They sat in comfortable silence after that, both watching Nora sleep. An hour later, when the baby woke hungry and fussing, Caroline fed her again in the privacy of the galley. This time felt easier, less weighted with shock and grief. This time, Harrison told her about Victoria, how they'd met at a charity gala, how she'd been an environmental lawyer who'd fought for conservation causes, how she'd died from a brain aneurysm while Nora was sleeping in the next room. "I found them both in the morning," Harrison said, his voice barely audible. "Nora crying in her crib, Victoria gone. The doctor said it was instantaneous, that she didn't suffer. But Nora, she must have been crying for hours before I woke up." Caroline's throat tightened. "That's not your fault. Logically, I know that. But at 3 a.m. when she's screaming and won't eat, it's hard to believe it." When they landed in Boston, Caroline had Harrison's business card in her pocket and a job offer that seemed too good to be true weighing on her mind. As they said goodbye at baggage claim, Nora sleeping peacefully in her father's arms, Caroline wondered if fate had put her on that plane for a reason. She had no idea that accepting Harrison's offer would unravel secrets about Victoria's death that someone had worked very hard to keep hidden. Caroline stood in the marble foyer of Harrison's Beacon Hill townhouse 3 days later, her 2 battered suitcases looking absurdly out of place against the gleaming hardwood floors and crystal chandelier. She'd spent those 3 days researching Harrison Westbrook, and what she'd found had almost made her back out. Westbrook Properties wasn't just successful, it was an empire. Harrison had built it from a single commercial building inherited from his father into a portfolio worth over $2 billion. His wedding to Victoria Chen, daughter of prominent Boston philanthropists, had been featured in every society magazine. Their life had looked perfect from the outside. But Caroline had also found the tabloid articles from after Victoria's death, the speculation about Harrison's grief, the whispered rumors that he'd been traveling too much, working too hard, not paying enough attention to his wife's health. The comments sections had been brutal. "You came," Harrison said, appearing at the top of the curved staircase. He looked better than he had on the plane. Showered, shaved, wearing jeans and a casual button-down that probably cost more than Caroline's entire wardrobe. Nora was tucked against his chest in a carrier, wide awake, and calm. I said I would. Caroline shifted her weight nervously. Though I'll admit, looking up your net worth almost changed my mind. This is a bit more than I expected. A wry smile crossed Harrison's face. The house is Victoria's doing. She grew up in this neighborhood, wanted Nora to have the same. His expression softened with sadness. I would have been happy in a condo downtown, but Victoria had plans. She always had plans. He came down the stairs and led Caroline through rooms that looked like they belonged in an architectural magazine. High ceilings, original crown molding, furniture that was both antique and somehow perfect. But there were signs of recent chaos, too. Baby bottles drying on expensive granite countertops, a bassinet set up in what was clearly meant to be a formal living room, burp cloths draped over a velvet settee. Your room is upstairs next to the nursery, Harrison explained. Private bathroom sitting area. I've converted Victoria's office into a formula preparation station, though obviously we may not need as much formula now. He paused, turning to face her. Caroline, I want to be clear about something. What you're doing for Nora, nursing her, that's above and beyond any normal nanny or nursing job. If at any point you want to stop, or if it becomes too much, you tell me. No judgment, no questions. I appreciate that. Caroline followed him upstairs, where he showed her a bedroom that was easily twice the size of her childhood room. Large windows overlooked a private garden, and the attached bathroom had a soaking tub that made her want to cry with joy after 6 months of bucket showers in Kenya. There's something else, Harrison said, lingering in the doorway. Victoria's family wants to meet Nora this week. Specifically, her mother Patricia and her brother Daniel. They've been concerned about my ability to care for Nora alone. Caroline heard what he wasn't saying. They're judging you. They're grieving, Harrison corrected, but his jaw was tight. And yes, they've made it clear they think Nora should be with family who can provide proper care. Patricia has suggested several times that she take Nora for extended periods, or that I should hire a full-time staff to essentially raise her while I work. But you don't want that. I want to be my daughter's father, not just the man who pays the bills. Harrison's voice was firm. Victoria and I both agreed we wanted to be hands-on parents, even with our careers. I'm not going to abandon that just because she's gone. Over the next week, Caroline settled into a routine that felt surreal. She woke with Nora for nighttime feedings, spent mornings teaching Harrison proper bottle techniques for when Caroline wasn't available, and afternoons researching ways to gradually transition Nora to formula. The baby was thriving, gaining weight, sleeping better, her cries less desperate now that she was properly fed. Harrison was at the office more, but he came home every evening by 6, taking over Nora's care while Caroline had time to herself. They fell into an easy partnership, comfortable silences punctuated by shared observations about Nora's development and occasional conversations about their pasts. But then Patricia Chen arrived. Caroline was in the nursery when she heard the front door open, followed by a woman's imperious voice. Harrison? Where's my granddaughter? In the nursery, Patricia. I'll bring her down. I'll come up. Footsteps on the stairs, quick and determined. Caroline had just finished nursing Nora and was buttoning her own shirt when Patricia swept into the room. She was elegant in the way only old money could be. Perfectly styled silver hair, designer clothes that looked effortless, cool appraisal in her eyes as she took in Caroline. And who are you? Patricia's tone wasn't quite rude, but it wasn't warm either. Caroline Mitchell. I'm Nora's nurse. Nurse? Patricia's eyebrows rose. Harrison didn't mention hiring medical staff. Harrison appeared in the doorway, slightly breathless. Caroline is a pediatric nurse. She's been helping with Nora's feeding issues. Patricia took Nora from Caroline's arms with practiced ease, examining her granddaughter with a critical eye. She looks well, better than the last time I saw her. That's because she's actually eating now, Harrison said. There was an edge to his voice that Caroline hadn't heard before. Patricia's sharp eyes moved between Caroline and Harrison, then down to Nora, who was drowsy and content. How exactly did you resolve the feeding issues? The pediatrician said it would take weeks. The silence stretched too long. Caroline saw Harrison's hesitation, the calculation behind his eyes about how much to reveal. Caroline has been nursing her, Harrison said finally. She lost her own daughter 7 months ago and was still producing milk. It was the only thing that worked. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Patricia's expression cycled through shock, horror, and something that looked uncomfortably like disgust before settling into icy composure. "You allowed a stranger to breastfeed my granddaughter." Her voice was dangerously quiet. "She was starving herself, Patricia. Caroline saved her life. Or so she claims." Patricia's eyes fixed on Caroline with open suspicion. How convenient that this woman appeared exactly when you needed help. "How do we even know she's qualified? That she's safe?" Caroline felt her face flush with anger and humiliation. "I provided all my credentials and medical records to Mr. Westbrook. Everything was verified." "By whom?" "Harrison. Forgive me if I don't find that reassuring." Patricia adjusted Nora in her arms possessively. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're so desperate to prove you can handle single parenthood that you're making reckless decisions, letting some random woman nurse Victoria's daughter. Do you have any idea how inappropriate this is?" "That's enough." Harrison's voice was steel. "Caroline is a professional who acted out of compassion. She's done more for Nora in 1 week than anyone else has managed in 3. Then perhaps Nora should come stay with me." Patricia's words fell like stones. "Clearly this situation is unstable. I have a proper staff, proper facilities. Victoria would want her daughter raised properly, not by some desperate woman playing house with her widowed husband." Caroline's stomach dropped. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. "You need to leave," Harrison said quietly. "Now." "Harrison," I said, "leave. You can see Nora when you're ready to be respectful to the people caring for her." Patricia's lips thinned into a hard line. She kissed Nora's forehead and handed her back to Harrison with obvious reluctance. "This isn't over. I'm calling my lawyer. Victoria's will stipulates that Nora should be raised with family support. If you can't provide a stable environment, the courts will intervene." She swept out of the nursery, her heels clicking sharply down the stairs. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Harrison sank into the rocking chair. Nora clutched to his chest. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to hear that." Caroline's hands were shaking. "She's right, though, isn't it? This situation is unusual. Maybe too unusual." "It's unconventional," Harrison corrected. "That doesn't make it wrong." He looked up at her, exhaustion and determination warring in his expression. "Patricia is grieving and angry, and she needs someone to blame. Right now, that's me, and by extension, you. But I'm not going to let her take Nora from me, and I'm not going to apologize for making sure my daughter is fed and loved." Later that night, after Nora was asleep, and Harrison had retreated to his home office to call his lawyer, Caroline stood in her borrowed bedroom and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. Patricia's words echoed in her mind. Some desperate woman playing house with her widowed husband. Was that what this was? Had she been so desperate for purpose, for a baby to care for, that she'd walked into a situation far more complicated than she'd realized? Her phone buzzed with a text from Harrison. "Daniel Chen just called. He wants to meet you tomorrow. Patricia's already told him everything, and he's threatening legal action. I understand if you want to walk away from this. No one would blame you." Caroline looked at the message for a long time. The smart thing would be to leave, to find a normal nursing job without billionaire family drama and custody threats. But then she thought of Nora's tiny hand curled against her chest while nursing. The peaceful way she slept now, the trust in Harrison's eyes when he'd asked for help. She texted back, "I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out." What Caroline didn't know was that Daniel Chen had already hired a private investigator to dig into her past, and that investigator was about to uncover secrets about Victoria's death that would change everything they thought they knew. Daniel Chen arrived at precisely 9 the following morning, accompanied by a lawyer and an air of barely contained fury. Caroline watched from the top of the stairs as Harrison opened the door, his posture defensive before a word was even spoken. "We need to talk," Daniel said without preamble. He was younger than Patricia, maybe 40, with his late sister's sharp features and an expensive suit that screamed corporate power. "Privately." "Anything you have to say can be said in front of Caroline," Harrison replied evenly. "She's part of Nora's care team." Daniel's eyes flicked up to where Caroline stood, his expression unreadable. "Fine. Then let's all sit down, because what I have to say concerns her too." They gathered in the formal living room, Harrison and Caroline on one sofa, Daniel and his lawyer on the opposite. The lawyer, a severe woman named Ms. Portman, placed a thick folder on the coffee table between them. "Mr. Westbrook," Ms. Portman began, "my client has serious concerns about the welfare of his niece. We've documented several instances of what could be considered negligent." "Just tell them, Margaret," Daniel interrupted, his jaw tight. He leaned forward, hands clasped, and Caroline saw something in his eyes that wasn't just anger, it was pain. "I hired an investigator to look into you, Caroline. I needed to know who was caring for my sister's daughter." Caroline's stomach dropped. "That's understandable. He found your nursing credentials, your work in Kenya, your daughter's death certificate." Daniel's voice softened slightly. "I'm genuinely sorry for your loss, but he also found something else. Something that changes everything." Harrison's hand found Caroline's, squeezing gently. "What are you talking about?" Daniel pulled papers from the folder, spreading them across the table. Medical records, official-looking documents, highlighted sections that Caroline couldn't quite read from her angle. "Victoria didn't die from a brain aneurysm," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "At least, not naturally. The autopsy showed elevated levels of a blood pressure medication she wasn't prescribed. Someone had been giving it to her, slowly, over weeks. Enough to weaken the blood vessels in her brain until one finally burst." The room tilted. Caroline heard Harrison's sharp intake of breath, felt his hand tighten painfully around hers. "That's impossible," Harrison whispered. "The doctor said it was sudden, unavoidable." "Because that's what it looked like." Daniel's eyes were wet now, grief breaking through his anger, but I couldn't let it go. Victoria was healthy, active, only 32 years old. Brain aneurysms do happen, but something felt wrong, so I pushed for a more detailed toxicology report. He looked directly at Harrison. "Someone was poisoning my sister." Ms. Portman cleared her throat. "Mr. Chen wanted to inform you immediately, Mr. Westbrook, but there's a complication. The investigator's background check on Ms. Mitchell revealed that she had access to the exact medication found in Victoria's system. She worked in a clinic in Kenya that dispensed it regularly." Caroline felt the blood drain from her face. "Wait, you think I killed Victoria? I wasn't even in the country. I didn't meet Harrison until the plane." "We know," Daniel interrupted. "The timeline doesn't work. You couldn't have done it." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "But the investigation led somewhere else." "Caroline, your ex-fiancé, Marcus, what exactly does he do for work?" "He's a pharmaceutical sales representative," Caroline said slowly, dread building in her chest. "Why?" Daniel pulled out another document, a visitor log from Harrison and Victoria's building. Marcus Reynolds signed in to visit this address 3 times in the month before Victoria died. The concierge remembers him because he always brought coffee and pastries. Said he was visiting a college friend. Harrison had gone completely still beside her. "I don't know anyone named Marcus Reynolds." "But Victoria did," Daniel said quietly. "I found emails between them on her old laptop. They dated briefly in college before she met you, Harrison. They'd reconnected on social media about 6 months before she died. Just friendly catching up at first. Then Marcus started confiding in her about his relationship problems, how his fiancée was falling apart after their daughter died, how she'd left him to go to Africa, how his life was destroyed. Caroline's world was spinning. Marcus was visiting Victoria. According to the emails, she was counseling him, being a good friend during a difficult time. Daniel's expression was grim, but the concierge said that on his last visit, Victoria looked upset. She escorted him out quickly, and he seemed angry. That was 1 week before she died. Ms. Portman opened another section of the folder. Mr. Reynolds had means, access to the medication through his pharmaceutical contacts. He had opportunity, multiple visits to the victim's home. But motive? She looked at Caroline with something that might have been sympathy. "That's where you come in, Ms. Mitchell. I don't understand," Caroline breathed. "Victoria was a lawyer specializing in family law before she switched to environmental work," Daniel explained. "Marcus sent her a draft of a custody agreement he wanted you to sign, giving him full custody of any future children because you were emotionally unstable after Amelia's death. Victoria told him it was legally baseless and ethically reprehensible. She offered to help you find representation if he tried to file it." The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. Marcus, who'd left her after Amelia died. Marcus, who'd been so angry when she'd refused to try for another baby immediately. Who'd accused her of abandoning him by going to Kenya. Marcus, who'd always been obsessed with control, with winning, with never being seen as a failure. He blamed her, Caroline whispered, for encouraging me to stand up to him, for making him look bad. The detective found more, Daniel continued, his voice heavy. Marcus bought a plane ticket to Boston for next week. The same week my mother was planning to file for emergency custody of Nora. He'd been communicating with Patricia, feeding her information about Harrison's negligence, positioning himself as a concerned party with medical knowledge who could testify. Harrison's face had gone pale with rage. He was going to use Nora to get to Caroline. And when that plane brought you two together, Daniel said, looking between them, he must have realized his plan was falling apart. Caroline nursing Nora, moving into your home, it created exactly the kind of bond he wanted to prevent. Ms. Portman pulled out her phone. We've already contacted the police with all of this information. They're moving to arrest Mr. Reynolds now. The evidence is circumstantial, but combined with Victoria's toxicology report and the timeline, it's enough for charges. Caroline couldn't breathe. Marcus had killed Harrison's wife. Her ex-fiancé had murdered an innocent woman out of spite and controlling obsession, and had been planning to use a baby as a pawn in whatever sick game he was playing. Caroline. Harrison's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. He turned to face her, both of his hands now holding hers. This is not your fault. None of this is your fault. But if I'd just signed his papers, if I'd stayed, then you'd be trapped with a murderer, Harrison said firmly. Victoria wouldn't have wanted that. She was trying to protect you, Caroline. That's who she was. Daniel stood, moving to sit on Caroline's other side. I came here ready to blame you, to think you were some opportunist taking advantage of my brother-in-law's grief. But now I understand. That plane, that moment when Nora wouldn't stop crying. Maybe Victoria had a hand in bringing you two together. She always believed things happened for a reason. Over the next 3 weeks, the world turned upside down, and then slowly righted itself. Marcus was arrested trying to board a flight to Canada. The evidence against him was overwhelming once police knew what to look for. Pharmacy records showing suspicious orders, security footage of his visits to Victoria's building, deleted emails he thought were erased forever. Patricia Chen came to the house one afternoon, her usual imperious manner subdued by grief and guilt. I was so angry at the world for taking my daughter, she told Caroline and Harrison, tears streaming down her face. I wanted someone to blame, and you were there. Both of you. I'm sorry. She was trying to help me, Caroline said softly. Victoria. She never even knew me, but she was trying to help. That was her nature. Patricia smiled through her tears. She couldn't stand injustice. She looked at Harrison holding Nora. And she'd be glad her daughter has you both. I see that now. 6 months later, Caroline stood in the nursery watching sunrise paint the walls gold. Nora, now 10 months old and thriving, had finally transitioned fully to formula. Caroline had gradually weaned her over months, making sure the baby accepted bottles before stepping back. It had been the right time, for both of them. You're up early, Harrison said from the doorway. He'd taken to working from home more, restructuring his entire company to prioritize time with Nora. Couldn't sleep, Caroline admitted. I've been thinking. About how random it all seemed at first. Getting on that plane, hearing Nora cry, making a split-second decision to help. She turned to face him, but maybe it wasn't random at all. Harrison crossed the room, standing close enough that Caroline could feel his warmth. Over the months, something had shifted between them, a connection that went beyond shared trauma and childcare. They'd been careful, neither wanting to rush or disrespect Victoria's memory, but it was there. Undeniable. Victoria's lawyer called yesterday. Harrison said quietly. They found a letter she'd written, to be opened if anything happened to her. Most of it was instructions about Nora, wishes for her upbringing. But there was a section about me. She said she hoped I'd find someone who understood loss, who knew how to hold grief and joy at the same time. Someone who'd love Nora like their own. Caroline's eyes burned with tears. "Harrison, I'm not saying this to pressure you," he continued quickly. "We've both been through hell. We're both still healing. But I want you to know that what started as an emergency, as a desperate moment on a plane, has become the best thing in my life besides Nora. You've become essential, Caroline. Not as a nurse or a nanny, but as you." Caroline thought about the daughter she'd lost, the grief that would always be part of her. She thought about Victoria, who died trying to protect someone she'd never met. She thought about Marcus, whose obsession had cost so much, but had ultimately failed to destroy the connections that mattered. And she thought about Nora, who'd been the bridge between two broken people, whose cries had led Caroline to exactly where she needed to be. "I'm not going anywhere," Caroline said, echoing the text she'd sent months ago. But this time, the words meant something different. This time, they meant forever. Harrison smiled, really smiled, for the first time since she'd met him. "Good, because I was hoping you'd consider a different position. Not as Nora's nurse." "Oh?" "As her mother, and as my partner. Whenever you're ready, however long it takes." Caroline kissed him then, soft and sweet, a promise of healing and new beginnings. Behind them, Nora cooed from her crib, as if giving her blessing to this new family being born from ashes. A year later, Caroline stood in a courthouse in a simple white dress, Harrison beside her in a navy suit, Nora toddling between them in a flower girl dress Patricia had insisted on buying. They were getting married in a small private ceremony, just family and close friends. Daniel was Harrison's best man. Patricia held Nora during the vows, tears streaming down her face. "Victoria would have loved you," Patricia whispered to Caroline afterward, embracing her tightly. "Thank you for loving her daughter, for loving her husband, for finishing what she started." And in a small way, that's exactly what it felt like. Not a replacement, never that, but a continuation, a testimony to the power of compassion, of choosing to help a stranger in their darkest moment, of trusting that even in grief, life could offer second chances. Nora called Caroline Mama now, though they made sure she knew about Victoria too, the brave woman who'd brought her into the world and whose kindness had, in a way, brought Caroline and Harrison together. Sometimes, late at night when Nora was sleeping peacefully between them, Caroline thought about that moment on the plane. The crying baby, the desperate father, the choice that had changed everything. She'd gotten on that flight expecting to face an uncertain future alone. She'd gotten off it having found a family she never knew she needed, and a love that proved healing was always possible, even when it seemed impossible. The unthinkable had become the unforgettable. And in the end, that made all the difference.